Hello vinyl community. Today I'm talking about a single album and one of my favorite albums of all time. And like so many of my favorite albums in the prog rock genre, this is one that's very divisive among the audience. One where some people, like me, think it's one of the greatest things ever recorded, and other people, including usually the artists themselves, say, oh, that one was just going too far. And this is the third album by King Crimson, Lizard, from 1970. And King Crimson on this album consisted of Robert Fripp on guitar and mellotron and other electronic keyboards and devices, Mel Collins on saxophones and flute, Andy McCulloch on drums, Gordon Haskell on lead vocal and bass, and Pete Sinfield writing the words and also playing some uncredited synthesizer, which he shared with Fripp. And the guest musicians. They had Robin Miller on oboe and English horn, Nick Evan on trombone, Mark Cherig on cornet, and Keith Tippett, very important to this album, on piano, and John Anderson of Yes, doing vocals on one song. So, with all those instruments, including the mellotron, which is very prominent throughout and provides a great many different sounds, this album has a huge amount of instrumental color. To my mind, the wind instruments, specifically the woodwinds, but also the brass, are really what give a colorful feel to the music. And I've always thought it was great how the album cover represents the very colorful music inside. Cover artwork by Ginny Barris, who, as far as I know, only ever did one other album cover for Julie Felix. I did an inside spread for that, which is similar to this. And the cover artwork includes representations of all the songs, beginning with Circus, appropriately enough in the Sea of Crimson. And Circus begins the album with no less than a creation myth. First things we hear on the album are this twinkling piano and a distant voice. Night, her sable dome scattered with diamonds. So it's the void of space with the pinpricks of stars. Fused my dust from a light year. That's the molecules of space dust coming together and forming matter and accumulating eventually over the eons into planets. Squeezed me to her breast, sewed me with carbon. Carbon is the building block of life. So this is the beginning of life. Strung my warp across time. And now, because there are living things, time becomes an issue. Gave me each a horse, sunrise and graveyard. This is what time means to living things. Life and death, sunrise, beginning, graveyard, the ending. Told me only I was her. Bid me face the east, close me with questions, built the sky for my dawn. Face the east, the dawn, the sunrise. This is the beginning of life. And then the rest of the song is, okay, this life is not an easy one. This is a crazy one. It's the surrealistic, bizarre circus theme that one sometimes sees in, for example, Emerson, Lake and Palmer did something like this with Carnival 9, the sinister, surrealistic circus or carnival of life. And this comes from Pete Sinfield's personal experiences. Apparently he grew up around circus people. So the voice that started out as something sounding distant in space, gradually they turn off the reverb and the voice becomes present halfway through that first verse that I just recited. And once that's done, there comes crashing in this grinding mellotron effect, and the song begins in earnest with those crazed circus lyrics. gives way to what Fripp called the Mantovani section, when there's this lush mellotron strings happening over the saxophone solo. The drums aren't playing a beat. The drums are spattering beats. The drums are skittering around the music. And that gives this album a lot of its unique feeling. Next song is Indoor Games, represented here on the cover. And that starts off with, after this very imposing opening track, this sort of hokey, almost perverted Dixieland kind of sound with massed saxophones from Mel Collins. And there's really a huge amount of humor on this album, and this is an example of that. One thing that's unusual about the previous song, about Circus and this song, is we hear Robert Fripp playing acoustic guitar. So there's not a lot of Fripp's typical electric sound on this. He plays a lot of mellotron. He heavily features the acoustic guitar on these first couple of songs. He does play electric guitar as well here, playing this sort of splintery, jazzy stuff, but it's overshadowed by the acoustic strumming, which is very bold, as well as all the other instruments. As throughout this album, with all these horns happening, with the mellotrons playing particular themes, there's a lot of blurring of the lines between improvisation and composition. There's a lot of collective improvisation, and apparently the way it was recorded was they recorded the improv sections in just short bursts. So Fripp could say, yes, this is how we want it. Okay, do another 8 bars. And apparently this was a bit frustrating to the jazzier guests like Nick Evans, who tells that story. And the whole thing ends up with a hey-ho and gales of laughter, and goes from there into their song about the Beatles, particularly chronicling their breakup. And the Beatles appear on the cover. Happy Family, a bit ironically titled. It tells the story of Jonah, Judas, Silas, and Rufus, who represent Jonah being John. Judas is Paul, who wrote Hey Jude, and is even referred to as Jude once in the song, and is also the Judas who was the first one to publicly break up the Beatles. We all know the Beatles were crumbling anyway, but at the time we didn't know that. Silas is George, and Rufus is Ringo. So we have jazzy electric piano coming out of this intro that's just like the Circus, when Circus breaks into that grinding mellotron thing. It's got this whirring synthesizer sound over these crashing descending chords, and this all just boop gives way to skittering jazzy piano from Keith Tippett. And a theme that's kind of nursery rhyme like. It's links to the rather sing-songy theme of Indoor Games again. So here's that humor, the very ironic kind of humor. And the next song is Lady of the Dancing Water, represented again on the cover. And this is their ballad for the album. This features a very prominent flute, basically soloing all through it, playing very beautiful lines, delicate piano, finger-picked guitar from Fripp, and trombone sort of giving it a little bizarreness that otherwise wouldn't appear in this song. And the percussion is barely there, just like, I think, 2 little accents, little ding sounds that happen over the course of the song. And it's then time to turn the side over, and we get the big suite, the Lizard Suite, starting with John Anderson providing vocals for Prince Rupert Awakes. And he gives a very delicate, soft delivery in the verses, which gives way to a very bold chorus. We've got spidery guitar from Fripp, backwards guitar sort of accompanying one of the choruses, and eventually builds up to the line, "Reels of dreams unrolled." And that's the cue for this massive climax, huge dramatic build-up with mellotron and wordless chanting from John Anderson and grandiose piano. And this then gives way to the bolero, the peacock's tail, and it begins to tell the story of some kind of medieval battle. But there's this long instrumental starting with a statement from the cornet of Mark Charig, and a gorgeous theme from Robin Miller on the oboe, leading into some jazzy improvisation where the horns start improvising collectively. And it's called a bolero. As usual, when rock guys write a bolero, they've heard Ravel's bolero, and they say, oh, a bolero is when a snare drum goes rat-a-tat. So they always end up writing a march. They always miss that a bolero is actually in 3/4. So that's what's happening here, but what the hey. Then it goes into the battle section itself. And this is hard to say because the side two parts are broken up over the cover, but I think this is representative of that. And it begins with just the English horn. And this part reminds me of Mahler a bit. It reminds me a bit of Das Lied von der Erde, where you have extremely sparse accompaniment at times with the vocals. So at this point, Gordon Haskell does his only vocal part on side two, just the two verses of the Dawn Song section of the Battle of the Glass Tears. And he's accompanied by just that English horn and maybe some little piano bits. Before the theme that we'd heard is taken up by the mellotron, and it goes into this sort of fractured blues big band thing with all the horns and the flute, and this is the skirmish. Fripp eventually re-enters on guitar, and after this long stop-start section of the sort of evolved, broken-up blues, it breaks apart into Prince Rupert's Lament, which is just a single note on the bass, tolling like a funeral bell, solemn drums, and Fripp delivering what is the closest thing on this album to a conventional guitar solo. It's really not that conventional, and it's just this keening, mournful sound with the, finally, first time on the whole album, that classic Fripp sustain effect. And as this fades out, the album ends on a piece called Big Top, which just fades in with this woozy, unstable sound, like a carousel. And the speed seems to be wobbling, the music fades in and just fades out. And we're back in the world of the circus. So it's like a little bit of a link back to the beginning of the album. So I don't know if that's of any value to anyone, but that's my take on the album, just off the cuff, so to speak. And I hope you got something out of that. Let me know. And I'll be back later. Oh, I did want to show one thing from the collection. This is my favorite King Crimson picture sleeve single. This is not from Lizard. They didn't release any singles from Lizard or the Lizard period. So this is from a couple of years later, The Night Watch and The Great Deceiver. This is from Italy. And you've got to dig Robert Fripp's purple suede shoes in this picture. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.